Hey guys, what's going on? Blaine back for another Netflix review, and today I'm going to be reviewing Pieces of a Woman. So the plot is essentially focused on two characters. Martha, performed by Vanessa Kirby, who's an executive for a company in the film, and then there's Sean, who's performed by Shia LaBeouf, who works as a construction worker for his team as he's building a bridge for the city they live in. There's also Martha's mother, Elizabeth, performed by Burstyn, and she plays a pretty substantial role as well during the film's events. I'm pretty sure everyone is aware of the premise of this film going into this review, but in case you're not, Martha and Sean are a couple and they're expecting a child together. We see them do all sorts of happy things like buying a new car, they're going to a baby shower party, they're doing all kinds of things together, and they're just in general really excited for the upcoming childbirth, which, as we all know by now, doesn't go the way as planned. The film is pretty quick to show the childbirth scene shortly after all these happy things are taking place. I don't want to spoil anything right away, but it is one of the most intense scenes I have ever seen in a film, at least in this current decade. It's 25 minutes long, it's uncut, and you just see the pain slowly overcome the happiness that's initially present in that situation. The acting that happens in that scene is amazing. It's so realistic. It has to be seen to be believed. I won't spoil any more than that. Through a series of very unfortunate events, the child dies during birth, and we see the characters, Martha, Sean, and everyone else around them trying to cope with the emotional fallout as a result of the situation they find themselves dealing with. The birth of a child in and of itself is a very personal situation for many adults throughout the world, so I can only imagine the pain that an adult would experience if they saw their child die in front of them. Portraying such a hurtful and tragic event on film requires a careful attention to detail, which means in order to pull that off, you need to have believable characters. In order to have believable characters, you need to have believable actors. If the actors aren't believable in their role in such serious of a topic as the death of a child, then the whole story falls apart and we don't believe the characters and what they're going through. Fortunately, I think the acting in this film is some of the best acting I've seen in at least the past year, within this current decade for sure. It's amazing that we're so early into the year 2021 and we're getting such an amazing level of acting being present in this film. It's just phenomenal. The performances are all fantastic, and I'm going to go into detail with each one as I go along in this review. First of all, Vanessa Kirby does a phenomenal job as Martha. She is an absolute tour de force and is the whole reason to see this movie to begin with. Martha doesn't react to the death of her child in the way that you might expect. She doesn't sit around and eat a bunch of snacks and get depressed, any sort of stereotype that might appear in your mind when you're thinking of how a person might deal with such a hurtful and bad situation. She actually does the same things as she usually did before the whole childbirth happened, but as one might expect, she approaches all those situations much differently than she did before. She's a lot more analytical, a lot more broody, moody, whatever word you want to use in that situation. She just mulls over things a lot more than she used to, as she obviously has the thoughts of her dead child in her mind constantly. She just has no idea how to process the situation that has fallen onto her lap. She just has a certain numbness to her as she tries to process everything around her, and I think Vanessa Kirby did an amazing job portraying a character that has no idea how to deal with what she's been given, and she's just trying to figure it out as she goes along. It's a very believable performance because grieving is a very individual process. Not everyone grieves for something the same way someone else does, in the same way someone might celebrate something. Everyone celebrates things differently. Marriages and birthdays and all that, anniversaries, and the same thing is true for grieving. Everyone grieves differently. Some people might just sit around and be depressed all day, while others just go about their own business and they just carry on life as normal. Of course, there are other characters that take issue with how Martha approaches things in an almost laissez-faire, nonchalant, non-caring kind of manner, if you will. Shia LaBeouf's character is a prime example of this. Shia's performance as Sean is almost as captivating as Kirby's is with Martha, if not more. I would argue that Sean, the character in this movie, is actually more affected by the death of his child as opposed to Martha is. He's constantly expressing his frustration with Martha, wondering why she's reacting to this the way she is. He gets emotional a lot, he cries, he screams, he actually gets physical with her quite a bit, and he even tries to force himself on her at one point in time, which I thought was kind of weird when I watched it at first, but then I realize the more I watched this film how much backstory that Shia's character Sean had. Over the course of the film as it develops, we see his character transform into a man that he used to be. He had to deal with a lot of drug issues in the past, he had alcoholism, I'm pretty sure there were a few other substance related things that happened in the past. He was basically the complete opposite of what Martha's mother Elizabeth wanted for her daughter. And it makes sense that he would grieve the most for his child, because him being a builder in the movie, being a construction worker, he's used to seeing things through to the end, and he has a very, very astute attention to detail. He's always chewing out his coworkers in the beginning, especially whenever people aren't getting anything right. If he notices someone doing something wrong, he is quick to point it out, and he just cusses at him, he loses his mind, and everyone's just like, hey, chill out, man, it's not a big deal. And he's like, it is a big deal. It's the same thing with how he treats the birth of his child. He treats it like it's a big deal because he is one half responsible for the birth of that child to begin with. So to see him lose something that he helped create, him being a natural builder in that regard, I can completely understand the pain that he is going through and why he might be frustrated at how Martha is just having to take too long in order to process her emotions, compared to Sean anyway. Another standout performance that really surprised me was Ellen Burstyn's performance as Elizabeth. She does a great job as a character who's trying her absolute best the only way she knows how in order to help Martha with her grieving. The problem with that is that the two of them grew up in completely different generations, different times of life, and as a result, both of them have very different ideas of how to handle each other's situations. There's very much a generational conflict, the same way you'd expect between parents and children nowadays. I initially hated her because of this, because she tried to insert herself into Martha's life and tried to poke about in things that she had no business involving herself in. She's always trying to hire this lawyer and trying to get her to sue the midwife who was actually responsible. That was one thing that I forgot to talk about in this review. I don't know how that slipped past me. So the midwife that they wanted to have for the birth of their child was unavailable due to her being occupied with the birth of another child, which is coincidentally happened the same time as Martha's birth. However, that midwife also recommended another midwife whose name is Eva, and they ended up going with her, and there's a big media scandal that happens after that whole childbirth scene, and Eva gets involved in like manslaughter charges and all these nasty things like misconduct. It's just a really, really dirty story. Anyway, regarding Elizabeth, I didn't really like her at first, but as the story developed, and especially as soon as her character starts developing more, there's a whole dementia angle that surrounds her, and you just grow to empathize with her as a character and feel sorry for her as the story goes on. So overall, I thought the acting in this film was just fantastic, A+. So now I'm going to go more into the symbolism side of things, just to kind of give my own perspective of what kind of themes I think are present in the story. The whole aspect of Pieces of a Woman in the title itself I thought was really interesting to me. Obviously, the title is centered on Martha as a character as she's trying to pick up the pieces that is left behind of her previous life following the death of her child and trying to rebuild herself into the woman that she used to be. She was very confident in her abilities in herself as a person, but following the death of her child, she loses that, and she's more focused on regaining that as opposed to, seeking justice, which is what pretty much everyone else in the film wants. Elizabeth's dementia is another aspect of the whole Pieces of a Woman thing that I kept thinking about. She's just not the same woman that she used to be either, because as the story develops, she starts losing her memory, she starts forgetting things, she's misplacing things. There's just all kinds of things that happen as far as the dementia angle is concerned, where you could apply the Pieces of a Woman title in that regard. The midwife goes through a ton of crap in the movie. I actually felt really sorry for her once the child was actually shown to be having a medical emergency during the childbirth itself, because you can see that there was no ill intent toward her purpose, which was being a midwife. She didn't want the child to suffer or to die. She was just doing her job. And to see her getting mired in all of this controversy that happens in the backstory of the film, it made me empathize with her a lot more in her particular situation. Even Sean's masculinity can be applied to the whole Pieces of a Woman thing, because he's always talking about how he feels emasculated. Martha doesn't want to have sex with him anymore. He has to go seeking sex from other people, so he's committing adultery. He falls back on old habits because that's all he knows that helps him numb the pain. Even like at the beginning when they're buying the vehicle, he literally says that he feels emasculated because he's being bought a minivan as opposed to a different other car that he wants. He basically just complains about the fact that he has to have a minivan in his his life. So the fact that he talks about feeling emasculated, and the fact that he tends to express more feminine traits as far as being emotional is concerned, you could apply that whole feminine aspect of being a woman. I know that sounds ridiculous, but that's what I thought of. I couldn't stop thinking about his masculinity in this particular sense. The use of seasons as a motif was also really good. It shows fall as kind of the onset of the whole debacle that happens before it all unfolds. Winter is used as kind of the whole center of the storm, the eye of the storm, if you will. That's where all the bad stuff takes place, in the middle of winter, and then by the time spring rolls around, you see everything resolved and brought to its conclusion. Whether that's in a good way or a bad way, I can't say, because I really cannot spoil this movie. It has to be seen. I'll also drop the apples motif really quick, because I know some people might want me to talk about that. I noticed it used a lot in the film, but I don't really have an answer for it, other than the fact that apples can be considered as a symbol of fertility. And obviously, the movie is about the death of a child, so you can see how Martha might use apples as a sort of symbol to grow past her grief. And you even see different sort of things happen to those apples, like she's always eating them, leaving them in her pocket. She's growing apple seeds, but they don't really grow until she's able to grow herself as a person and come to terms with her grief. There's just a lot of symbolism present in this film, and you can tell that it's a European movie through and through. I actually looked it up on Wikipedia when I finished watching it, and 100% it is a European movie, or at least made by Europeans. Not necessarily a bad thing, but you can tell that it's very much different than what Hollywood would normally produce. So that was my spiel on Pieces of a Woman in a very large nutshell. In summary, I think it's just an amazing film and everyone has to see it. It's just the way it touches on such a deeply personal topic without being boring in the process. I've seen other films in the past that touch on similarly controversial topics and they just fall flat. They make me fall asleep when watching them, but I was thoroughly invested in every character's part of the journey from beginning to end, and I hope that you are too when you watch this. Some people might take issue with how flat Martha's reactions are to everything that happens around her, but you gotta understand that everyone, like I said earlier, reacts to these sorts of things differently. There's no right or wrong way to react to the death of a child. Obviously, you do have to be sensitive to that person and you have to be understanding of what they're going through, but really, I don't think you can ask much more than that. I think it's very realistic in the way that it approaches its topic. It's very tasteful. It doesn't linger too much on the death part. It only shows what's necessary to get the story across, which was very tasteful, very well done. I highly recommend it. If there were a way to give 2 thumbs up to this movie, then I would 100%. But yeah, that's my review of Pieces of a Woman. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. And as always, stay tuned for the next part where I review the film Lupin.